Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way is in Training. This is a podcast exploring how warriors should train and fight, as well as how they should live. We will talk about technique, but we'll also dive deep into fitness, mindset, and strategy. We will explore leadership and philosophy as well. So whether you are a young soldier, a veteran police officer, a responsible armed citizen, or simply someone looking for an authentic life, let's examine how the lessons of combat and preparation for it can help us fulfill our potential. Let's explore the way together and learn how the discipline of training can show us our true selves amidst the chaos of life. Hey everybody, in this episode I've got my friend Tim Herron back on. Tim has been a huge influence on my shooting. He's an all-around good guy. Plus, if you get me, him, and AJ together, we are the cast from The Lord of the Rings. So everybody should know who you are, but just in case, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, Tim?
Yeah, my name's Tim Herron. I own Tim Herron Shooting LLC. I've been a full-time trainer across the country now since 2019. And so this is year number 6 now for me, getting to travel all over the country and teach and coach people how to become better performance-oriented shooters. So my background is primarily USPSA, a little bit of IDPA, kind of dabbled in there as well, but primarily from the competition side of things. So a 4-division grandmaster. I'm a Team USA World Shoot member. So I get to go to the World Shoot this year in South Africa in September and compete hopefully for a world title. And but yeah, that's a little bit about me.
So if anybody, because I talk to people about all kinds of training, right? I talk to martial artists, I talk to, more defensive minded shooters, people from my military and police careers. Mm-hmm. So there's people listening that aren't necessarily on the competitive side of things. So I just want to throw it out there that I have learned a huge amount about the nuts and bolts, the nuances of shooting at a high level, performance-based shooting from you, Tim. So anybody who's listening who dismisses competitive stuff, because there are still a few people that don't, grasp the overlay, right? You need to train with Tim. Definitely need to seek him out. He's got a lot of really good insights about how to train. And, actually, because we were talking before I started recording about what we would talk about, we were just going to kind of wing it.
Uh-huh.
I have something I want to ask you about.
Please do.
Because I've never trained with him. And I've kind of learned about his mechanisms of training secondhand through guys like Les and a few other people that have trained with him, right?
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned from your class with Eric Grauffel?
Oh,
I have some thoughts on this, and I really want to talk to you about it.
So I had wanted to train with Eric, pretty much since I started shooting. He's probably without a doubt, arguably the greatest pistol shooter to grace the earth. He's a 9-time consecutive world champion. He's in his time, as far as in world championships, he's been undefeated. And he brings a completely different foot forward in training and in the way he kind of organizes his own training as well as how he manages his expectations at matches and things. So to get an opportunity to train with him back in January, end of January in Florida, it was a great honor and obviously a huge opportunity to get to do so. I would say without a doubt, the training I had with him over over those 2 or 3 days was probably the biggest game changing for me, in that it completely kind of rewired the way I had been thinking about or pursuing my own training. Not necessarily from a standpoint of okay, I need to completely erase the board, whatever I was doing before wasn't working, but a lot of nuances that I hadn't really considered, kind of going more from kind of stepping away a little bit more from block training and doing more randomization.
Yeah, more interleaving training. That's one of the things I wanted to hit on with you.
Yeah. And then not only just with the randomization also, but with, in interleaving, but also adding more complexity as well, like every rep. And like every rep, if the first rep was 20 rounds, the next rep would be 35 rounds, the next rep would be 48 rounds, so the complexity in the number of shots, the number of positions, the number, like the amount of work that you continuously almost double per rep, and then never doing the same repetition the same way twice. There was a huge awakening there for me, especially from the standpoint of I've been a fairly consistent shooter. And I say that kind of loosely because my consistency has been really good, let's say short courses, maybe a medium course, or just in my own training. But I have always lacked the consistency like throughout an entire, let's say 2-day or 3-day match. And a lot of that is just simply because I don't train. I hadn't put myself in an environment to train to failure, but then to push beyond that failure so much, like how do you dig yourself out of that? Like how do you learn to become consistent well beyond the point of failure? And so like training and practicing to your own comfort level is one thing, but training and practicing and constantly changing the stimulus of what you're doing in training, for me was a huge awakening. So that was a big thing that I took away from Eric. It's something that I have been adamantly applying in my own training now over this last month and a half now since training with them. And for me, I consider it the same as like having somebody who's never taken a formal performance-based shooting class before. If they take a class with you or with me or with AJ or with, a multitude of other trainers, it's like to have that initial awakening where they like, I never thought about organizing my practice. I never thought about these things in this context. And they see these humongous leaps in their own training. For me, it was like, that's been the big takeaways for me. It was like, I don't want to say I'd been doing it wrong. I had just not been doing it to the level and to the expectation that I've needed, kind of as a pseudo top level guy, where it's just like, I think a lot of it too is like, even when we tell students, don't get sucked into being comfortable all the time and, train being uncomfortable. This was a whole new level of like uncomfortable for me that has been very enlightening.
See, and I find this like really fascinating for me because, I mean, you've known me and my shooting for quite some time now, and you know my strengths and my weaknesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, I've done this on some level. Like when Les and I used to practice, when we do his Calvin ball drill, we change things up, and so it's not like I've never done it, but I think too much of my training has been that obsessive grind. 5,000 reps of your head box bill drill. I hate you. But you understand what I'm saying, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of mine has been that same way. It's a grind constantly. It's like, I need to go out and grind something out and put in the work X amount of rounds until I get it, and then continue to do it until not only do I have it, like I have
consistent.
It, right. I have it consistently. And the way Eric's approach is very little block style training. Everything is more randomized.
And I think that the problem for me, or at least part of it, right? I'm sure that you can attest to the fact that I have plenty of issues and problems, but the one that impacts what we're talking about is that I kind of felt like I still had more work to do on the block training grind before I could shift over that much to the more randomized interleaving style of training, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these last few months, I've been beginning to suspect that I am wrong. I think that I will probably have much better consistent performance if I change up the way I'm training. Because right now I have peaks and valleys. And you know this too, My peaks are pretty good. I'm pretty happy with my peaks. My valleys, maybe not so much.
And I'm the same way. I mean, the big thing to take away, like on personal conversation from Eric, like after that class, we kind of talked at length for a bit. And I was like, hey, So, I'm going to my first ever world shoot this year. And Eric was like, yeah, I'm so great. Congratulations. I'm very happy for you. Can't wait to see you there, kind of thing. And I was like, so the takeaways that I've got throughout this weekend, like if there was anything that you could give me feedback wise, like as a coach to a student, what would be the things that you, Eric, feel that I really need to work on more than anything? And he was like, and I mean, the great thing was he was, like with Eric, you're going to get 100% honesty. And he was like, I'll be honest. He goes, you're very accurate. He's like, your ability to score points is not a problem because you know what you need to do. He goes, your biggest weakness right now is your consistency. And for me, I was like, oh God. But he was like, he's like, but you understand? He's like, in 2 days, you had some runs that were sensational. Like you were keeping up. Granted, I took that entire class shooting classic division, single stack 1911s with like 6 and 7 magazines on my belt to shoot like a 66 round stage. It was brutal. And he was like, you had moments of greatness where you were shooting within, 3/4 of a second to a second of, all of these guys shooting high cap red dot guns. He said in a couple of stages you were, top 3. He goes, but just as as well, like there were moments of like pure, like what the hell happened, in your training, like within that class too. He goes, so he says, your highs are high, but your lows are low. And you need to, he's like, honestly, you need to really focus on just stepping up the consistency. He said that the consistency you have right now is not enough, and I knew what he meant by that. So it's not enough to pursue a world championship. So, and that was, so, I mean, for me, I don't want to say like I took it personal, like, how dare you, but I did take it personal from a standpoint of like, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And if I plan on taking anything away from this, like from this experience with Eric, was I'm going to listen to everything he says and I'm going to apply it 150%. I'm not like, I think some people, like from any class, they hear what they want to hear and it validates, I think, their beliefs in some ways, but then they hear things that they don't want to hear and they immediately kind of shelf that, like, well, I think he's wrong on this because of this, and this. And I think we've all been guilty of maybe doing that a little bit because it kind of hurts our ego a little bit, to admit, well, who the heck does he think he is? Like I'm a pretty well accomplished guy. And so for me, I want to come in with an absolute, like as an open book or a clean slate and say, hey, whatever you feel like my problem is, I need to address it wholeheartedly and not leave anything on the table, especially as I'm trying to prepare, to compete for a world championship. This is my first time. It may be my only time. And I want to make the most of it. So the last thing I'm going to do is dismiss anything that Eric tells me, as if to protect myself and be like, well, whatever, yeah, I'll do this, but I'm not going to do those other things. I just immediately like have kind of erased everything I'd been doing in the past, knowing that it's gotten me to a great place. But from here now to the end of September, I'm going to pursue this other way and see how far it takes me.
So I got a couple thoughts I want to run by you.
Yeah.
One is I find this really interesting because to me, because just like you've known me for years, I've known you for years, right? We've shot together a bunch of times.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always thought of your consistency as a strength of yours. But I'm looking at it from the lens of a shooter that is not as accomplished as you, who struggles with consistency myself. You see what I mean?
Sure.
And I can see where maybe from the world shoot standpoint, I'm not really articulating this right. It's interesting to me as a criticism of you because I have always considered you a very consistent shooter. And I know what you're saying about, what you may be unhappy with as far as consistency goes, but compared to, you've got to be in the top like 0.001 percentile of pistol shooters in the earth, but you know what I'm saying? There's very few people that shoot as well as a USPSA C class shooter, much less a national champion, You know what I mean?
No, I do. I understand what you're saying. And, and I think that was also, and I don't necessarily consider this like a mistake on my part, but I also used to consider myself more like a very consistent shooter as well, until I'm not, and then I've always wondered kind of like, well, why? Like I had a great day one at nationals last year, and then I had a horrible day two at nationals last year. And then I had a mediocre, but a very up and down, day three at nationals to finish fifth. And I know some people will be like, oh my God, I'd give my left arm to finish fifth at a national championships. I've been fifth a few times. So fifth for me was like, God dang, here we go again. Like, come on.
Well,
Like,
especially because you could easily win it. Like that's the thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm not saying that to blow smoke. I know how good you are. Like if you had,
you're right. And I came into that match feeling up here, like I felt very, very confident in my ability. And then and I think a lot of it's because I have been training, like in my own practice, I have been training to a level of consistency of what I expected as far as like in block learning, right? Like I'm going to go do some 25-yard build drills and just really drive down the times and drive down like how good my grip needs to be to return the gun, to be able to feel confident shooting, let's say 30 splits with iron sights at a 25-yard target and have an exceptional high number of alphas. Is it relative and is it applicable to what I'm doing in a match? In some ways, yes. But where the limitation was, though, is I'm doing that really in a very, very controlled environment because of kind of the block learning that I was trying to accomplish in practice. Was it worthwhile? Sure. But was it also a detriment? Absolutely. And now, like the awakening has happened, like I said, towards the end of January with training with Eric, where it's like you can do the same things like I don't want to say in a block style, but like get enough reps shooting a 25 or 30-yard target, but doing it amongst a much higher level of complexity within a full rep of things, where you might address that same target 5 or 6 times from 4 or 5 different locations, where your approach to it is always going to be a little different, right? It's not going to be just a draw and fire 5 to 10 rounds to it. It's like draw and move, fire and shoot 6 or 7 other targets. Then you're addressing that target. And then you're reloading and moving over here. Now you're addressing this target from a completely different angle amongst a different array. And you're seeing glimpses of things, but you're seeing glimpses of things that are being thrown at you differently.
And I had a really cool conversation with Paul Sharp. Do you know Paul Sharp?
You do.
So Paul and I had a really cool, actually on the podcast, we had a really cool conversation about something that I think is relevant to that I want to come back to.
Okay.
But I wanted to say one more thing about this while we're on the topic, if you don't mind. And sure. I think this is something I've been guilty of many times in my life. And it's something that I wish I could learn to not do. And I think this is what is applying to my training right now, especially talking about the interleaving style of training, because I've always known the value of it. Well, not always, but since I first learned about it, I've known the value of it, right? But it is very hard to abandon something that got you a lot of gains, even after it's no longer valuable.
Exactly.
It's very hard to let go of something that worked. It worked really well to get me to a certain point. I went through the same thing when I came to, performance shooting from the military and police. I was a really good shooter in that world for that time, right? But I had to leave behind the things I had done to get there because they weren't going to get me any further.
Yep.
And I think I need to do kind of the same thing with USPSA and IDPA and, just say performance-based shooting, right? Practical shooting. Is the things I was doing aren't serving me as well anymore.
Right. And I would say as a trainer and as a coach, I don't think complete abandonment of like of those principles or of those concepts is warranted, because from a teaching standpoint, and I think it still has a lot of merit in being able to introduce maybe somebody that's obviously not at this level, to introduce them to, to concepts and principles that make a lot of sense to bring them up to a level. But I also think, like, as coaches or as high performing individuals, you also got to look at ways to shake it up for yourself as well. And for me, like, I've been shook to my foundation right now, and it's scary, and it was scary at first, and it was extremely.
That's pretty cool, though. That's really cool when you think about it, though.
Like, holy smokes! I mean, the amount of learning and coming at things from a completely fresh and new perspective has been absolutely awesome. Like, other than the super high winds we've had at our house the last couple of days, I can't wait to get out to I am jonesing and chomping at the bit to get out to the range and shoot in upwards of, I'm talking high round count practice sessions now, where I'm like, I'm going to bring a case of ammo, and I may not come back in the house until it's gone, or until I have completely exhausted every effort that I could at throwing myself at, this task 27 different directions.
So Paul Sharp and I, we were talking about this. We were talking about this from a fighting perspective, in terms of, martial arts, self-defense, combatives perspective, right? But we were talking about getting different looks on something.
Yes.
So, and he was talking about, like, one of the pieces of the conversation we had involved, like, him throwing a hook, and how he wasn't really good at throwing hooks and scoring. And he talked to, I believe it was his brother, who's a really good Muay Thai guy, and a boxer, really good. And he was talking about, how his brother was like, just for a few months, just keep throwing it, just spam it, whether it works or not. And we talked about that. And we talked about the value of different training partners when you're sparring and working with a variety of different people, because it gives you a different look on the same things.
Right.
And then we turned it back to this, and I want to bring it back to this for us too, for you and me too, is like the simplest example I could think of is the draw. And I'm sure this happens to you to less of a degree and less of a frequency than it does to me, but there's plenty of times where I don't get the exact right grip on my draw.
Mm-hmm.
If I have enough looks at making it work with a slightly off grip, and a different kind of slightly off grip, a variety of slightly off grips, now having that slightly off grip is not a showstopper, because I have the looks, right?
Yep.
Or like talking about the 25-yard splits, like you were talking about. And you were just talking about getting it from a bunch of different angles and a bunch of different lead ends and approaches and exits and everything else. It's a different look. Yes, you're still doing the same skill, but it's a slightly different context, just slightly different. And I think there's something to that. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, with how the brain learns and how high performers learn. And I think there's really some magic there into getting as many looks as you can on a skill.
Mm-hmm. You think about it as a musician. I've been approaching my practice a lot lately, like almost kind of from a music angle too, right? So think of some of the greatest guitarists, like especially rock guitarists that have ever played.
It's funny because Paul and I made the same analogy too.
Right. We
actually had the exact same conversation. Yeah.
Kick ass riffs or tunes or harmonies or things like that just come from them sitting in a chair with their guitar and just playing, just strumming, playing, like just in all sorts of different scales, playing up scales, down scales, and it's not just pattern learning. It's not like, okay, this is the piece of music that I've kind of written, and I'm just going to play this pattern until I get it. A lot of times it's straight up like the riff just comes from something that you felt or something that you like maybe kind of happened upon on accident. And then you play something else and then interpret that riff or interpret that solo or those notes that make a lot of sense into other things that you do. And then it becomes like you let it kind of grow or kind of breathe so to speak, into something on its own. And I think a lot of it is because the brain stays more engaged. It's not just physically going through the actions, like a lot of our shooting training is. And for all intents and purposes, most of our shooting training, we do this we approach it this exact same way. I'm going to just continue to wreck myself into a hole and then beat this to an oblivion until I get it, instead of figuring out the approach a completely different way.
And I think too, one of the dangers of that for me is, I'm not predisposed by personality to training that way at all. I mean, no, not me, right? I am literally like the guy that will stand there until my hands bleed because I'm not happy with a bill drill.
Right. Nope, I'm the same way.
But I think there's a problem with that for me. And I can't remember who said this, but I saw this on social media. Every once in a while, there's something good on social media. Not that often, but it happens. I saw this on social media the other day, and somebody said, matches don't measure your ceiling, they measure your floor. And I wish I knew who said it, because I'd love to give him credit, because that's a brilliant way of looking at it, right?
Yeah.
And for years, I've been raising the height of my ceiling. See what I mean?
I 100% do.
And I think that there's a danger for me, and back to the musician analogy, right? You've got to learn the scales. You've got to know the chords.
Absolutely.
So there's a place for that. But then at a certain time, you've got to learn to move past that. Yeah. And I think that for too long, I've held on to the scales and the chords. And it's really hurt me, right? So like that's kind of where I'm at.
Yep.
When I'm not saying I'm anywhere near as good as you, that's not my point. But I think I'm at a similar place in my what I need to do next is a little bit similar, I think.
I 100% agree. And I agree with you, because I am living that and feeling that right now. So you brought up Paul, and we both know Paul's an extremely accomplished martial artist, right? Yes. This would be the exact same thing as, let's say, Paul working with, he's a hell of a coach as well. Like, imagine Paul working with a room full of brand new practitioners, that are brand new to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? And then so you teach them things like early on, you have to learn to fall. You have to learn what it's like to be able to fall and not hurt yourself. And then you learn what it's like to achieve guard, and you learn what it's like to pass guard, and there's all of these little nuanced things that you rep out and you rep out and you rep out and you rep out. And then once you learn the basics, like the foundational skills, then it's like you throw one other little thing into the mix. But then you start doing things like open mats. And with open mats, like what you're doing now is that you're challenging the newer practitioner. Okay, great. We learned, let's say, this wrist lock or this arm bar or this whatever. Now we're going to put you in some bizarre situations where not only do you have to like maybe pass a guard or whatever you need to do, but then how to incorporate whatever that lock or that arm bar or whatever that key component is in with being like, you're kind of thrown to the wolves, and like you're trying to figure out how to implore that move, but not get your, but you know what I mean? In an uncontrolled,
make it work.
Just environment. Right. And shooting, I don't think we do that enough. Like, I know we don't, most don't. And we kind of, I agree with you 100%. Like, we get comfortable. Even when we tell ourselves, I'm uncomfortable, I'm going to shoot at a higher level of speed than when I can visually perceive information. Great.
What we've done is we've learned to be comfortable with a level of visual uncomfortableness. We are not psychologically uncomfortable anymore, because now we're mentally comfortable with shooting at that pace.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I can go through the pace and set up drills that I know I'm pretty proficient at, or exercises, or like testing a skill set that I happen to have. But I'm not testing that skill set. Like, I'm not pressure testing that skill set beyond its breaking point like I am now. And then the other thing is you don't have time to get comfortable, because every single rep, you're adding another layer of complexity to it. Like in this randomized training, you're adding another layer of complexity to it, where there's never a time that you're like, oh yeah, I'm mentally focused on this one task. It's like, no. It now has to kind of play in the background while I'm focusing on not screwing up the 31 other tasks that I have to do. And then lo and behold, along the way, you're like, oh, yeah, that now I'm just letting that subconsciously happen. Ta-da! It's happening now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I really think there's something really profound to this, actually. And it's frustrating for me because, like I said, it's one of those things that I definitely understood intellectually. I've read about it, and I even like applied it in some ways in my training, like doing lessons Calvin ball and, doing a little bit of interleaving with different drills and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I really embraced it like I should.
I used to preach to students, like shooting stages is bad as far as practice. Like I used to see that, because and I think for some people it might be too early where they're trying to interleave too much without a solid grasp of like foundational skills or concepts. But I used to tell people, like, the problem is with the really extended drills is it's hard to diagnose what you did on like the second round or third round on an exercise. By the time that you get to like round 20 or 25, you've already forgotten the mistake you made because you're just focusing on these other things. And I'm here to tell you now, like in my own training, I was wrong, because the real stressor then becomes like, if I make a mistake in, let's shooting a stage. Let's say I set up a 5-position stage and I'm going to shoot it 15 different 15 different directions and ways. If I screw up the first or second position, I now have that eating away at my conscious while I'm I'm working position 7, and now I have to go back into position 2 again, and then rinse and repeat all the way through the exercise. Then the goal then becomes, don't let an early mistake like grow into or snowball into making other mistakes because I wasn't able to like consciously or subconsciously let it go. It's like a mistake that happened. Don't let it capitalize into something larger. It's like, okay, you acknowledge that mistake, you get back on track, you complete the rep. And then once you're done, then you acknowledge, okay, this is what I did here. This is what I need to improve. But instead of going back and just fixing that one little tidbit of it or isolating it out, no, I have to correct it, but I have to correct it by now also adding this another additional layer of complexity to it. And then I have to just fix it by incorporating that in with the rep. So it's like mentally, it's the toughest thing I've ever done, because it's throwing me off of my consistency game.
You got my gears turning. I'm figuring out ways to implement this.
Mm-hmm.
I really think too. Tell me what you think about this. This is an impression I've gotten just from hearing about Eric's grip, right? And I'm not saying everybody should do his exact grip. That's not my point. But it kind of made me think about this just a minute ago when you were talking about adding the complexity. And one of the things that I've always kind of struggled with is being too tense and too aggressive, right? And like in some of the martial arts I did, the way you would work that out is you would literally just work till exhaustion, because you can't be tense and aggressive when you're exhausted.
Yep.
And I always thought that was a bad thing when it came to shooting, because shooting is such a precision skill. You know what I mean? You can't be sloppy with it. Now I'm rethinking that based on our conversation, because I know one of the reasons he came up with his grip style is because of fatigue. So he could go longer without being fatigued. And now I'm wondering if maybe the idea of doing in this sort of training, maybe not so much in like build drills, right?
Right.
But in this sort of training, maybe that fatigue can be a good thing, because it forces you to relax physically and mentally. You can't push and try harder. And it makes you find that place.
Yep. I think so too. And then the thing is too, is like you're constantly taking hands off the gun, putting hands back on the gun when you get to another position to shoot again. So everything is constantly changing. So like, what if you got a great grip out of the holster to the first array, but then during a reload or after a reload and you regrip the gun and you're like, something's off. And then you have to learn now, like, okay, them's the card I was dealt. Now I'm playing this hand in this position. And then you get to the next position and it's like, how good are you at overcoming little idiosyncrasies or inconsistencies in what you're bringing to the table, amongst this huge complex task that you're shooting or doing, and just and focusing on I have to deal with it. Right.
And that goes back to, I think, to like what we were talking about a minute ago, the conversation Paul and I had about getting different looks on the same thing.
Yep.
The more looks I get on it being slightly different, the more I can run with it when it's slightly different and it doesn't take me off my game.
100%. I shared a neat little quip. I can't remember who I shared it from either on Instagram, talking about block learning versus randomization. And it was
I think I put that in my story.
Yeah, like a female baseball coach.
Yeah, I did. I put that in my story.
She was like, if baseball, if a baseball player or a batter wants batting practice and you throw him 30, like, okay, we're going to do batting practice for an hour and we're going to throw you just nothing but fastballs. That guy's going to get really good at being able to to hit a fastball in that environment. But if you randomize another guy and you say, okay, listen, you're going to bat for an hour, but we're going to throw you a complex string of fastballs, curves, sliders, knuckleballs, fastballs, knuckleballs, sliders, curves, and just continually randomize like what that guy is seeing. You're making his brain and making his body stay engaged much more than the person that almost kind of turns a little bit of the sensory stuff off and just knows, okay, the timing is I'm just going to keep swinging at this. And as long as I keep making connection with it, like I'm getting practice. Where the other person is staying much more engaged because of the randomization. Like they don't get an opportunity to just turn the conscious mind off.
And I think that goes back to like the whole ceiling versus floor thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I do enough of any one particular shooting drill, I can get pretty good by the end of that little block.
Oh gosh, yeah.
That doesn't mean I can do it for my first rep.
Exactly.
And I think there's something to that too, like learning to, I don't know how to put it. And like I said, I think there's a place for grinding away, especially earlier on. I think there's definitely a place for grinding away. I think it's essential.
I agree.
But I think at a certain point, and I don't think it's necessarily a point that is as high as I used to think it was. Because when I would think about this stuff before, like, Eric Grauffel was one of the examples I used when I talked about, how I divide drills up into experimentation, isolation, combination, and validation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about how over your training lifetime, you do more and more combination work, which is the randomization stuff.
Yep.
And then I would use Eric as an example, like, at a certain point, it becomes basically all you do. I think I was wrong about how good you need to be to do that. I think I've been too cautious about that.
And
I've been afraid to do it. I've been afraid to practice what I preach.
I'm the same way. And like I said, that's been the awakening that I've had more than anything, was like, I should have been doing this probably 3-4 years ago. And why I wasn't is I even though we tell people, again, always practice to an uncomfortable level. You should be uncomfortable, constantly pushing things. But even in that, like you said earlier, we get comfortable being uncomfortable in
that flavor of uncomfortable becomes comfortable.
Correct. And I think a lot of it's because we live and die by like the data too. We're very data-driven creatures. And when you randomize things so much like that, there's not a whole lot of data to truly collect other than like the hit factor itself. Yeah. Right. It's just, it's all the points divided by all the time comes up with a hit factor. And then you let the hit factor, like that data is the only thing that kind of drives your progression beyond that, instead of like, well, I need to get faster at this. Well, I need to get more accurate at that. It's like, no. It's always going to be a blend of those two things together, no matter how deeper and how much more complex it becomes. Just let that be the only thing. Like at no point in time is it ever like, well, my split on that one target could have been faster, or, well, my transition in this one array could have been better. It's like you did, like the main thing you're looking at is, does my performance equal the math that I had before me, holding me accountable to this, whatever this big complex task was, and did I achieve that? It dismisses, I don't want to say completely dismisses, but it does dismiss the little things that sometimes when we're trying to just absolutely hammer on a particular skill set, where we'd say like, I didn't have the best grip here, or, oh, I entered in on the wrong foot in this position, or, oh, I drop stepped when I didn't want to, or, you know what I mean? All these little nuances that in the grand scheme of things are completely meaningless. They really are, ultimately. It's like if I may have felt like absolute crap getting into that position, maybe I over crashed into it, or maybe I didn't have the best established support hand grip in it, but was I capable of getting the hits on the target, like providing the score I needed to in that array, and then just moving on? Like, mistakes are going to happen. Do you let those mistakes again snowball into something larger, or do you limit that little mistake there? You acknowledge it, but you move on beyond it. And that's where block learning, like we have been applying in our own training forever, I think is like very short-sighted, because you never figure out a way to overcome things they're going to happen.
Now, do you find yourself, because I know maybe I shouldn't say do you find yourself, because I know you're aware of this because you're a far better shooter than I am. So I'm asking it the wrong way. Do you think it's important, like say you do a complex drill, and you know how you get those flat frames of the things that went right or wrong after you're done? You can see it in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's like you finish a stage and you know that one target was funky, right? You walk out to that one target, right? Do you find that sort of feedback when you're doing this style of training helps you fix things, or do you kind of just dismiss that?
No, I think it does help me fix things. And now the thing that I've been playing around with too, and I'm going to say playing with, I've been really exploring, is if I continue to make, let's say, a movement mistake, like maybe I'm entering in and I'm coming in at too hard of a lean, or I'm just not confident in like how the gun feels when or how the gun's pointing at a particular target, or maybe I feel like my upper body structure is too compromised into a position, then I will go back and maybe just isolate that for 3 or 4 reps. And I don't want to do the entire thing. It might just be like, you know what? I'm getting okay results on that, but I don't like the way that feels. And now, as Eric would say, your feelings are meaningless. Like, you've got to just know that you're shooting based on the math, right? You're allowing the data to drive everything. So even just because it might feel terrible doesn't mean that it's wrong. Just like if it feels good doesn't necessarily make it right. So I will then explore, like, okay, I'm just gonna move to this position, and bam, bam, like, okay, I'm getting it now. I'm uncomfortable here because I am a little late getting the gun up into that position, and I feel a little rushed and off balance. But if I just get the gun up just a little bit earlier here, so maybe I need to face my hips back towards the target as I'm running up range to get around the wall, and just allow me a smidge more early exposure, like to the sights on that particular target. Not necessarily does it just feel better, it looks better visually. Like, everything that I'm acknowledging, sights on target, I'm seeing more. I don't feel rushed. I don't feel hurried. It just becomes a little, like, just very smooth into that position. I might look at that and be like, okay, that's what I need to do then. Now I've isolated it 3 or 4 reps and figured out like what that does. Now it's not like, okay, this becomes the rest of the drill I'm working. Now it's like, okay, I fixed that. Now let's add, like not even shooting the entire drill the same way again. It's like, okay, now let's add another leg, and you're going to come at it from a different angle. And when I come into that angle, I'll just know that, okay, I figured out what I need to do. Now I need to consciously make the effort to do what I focused on for 4 or 5 reps to fix that, and then move off, to the next array or the next whatever. So it's been good to like do the interleaving and all the randomization, but then with like just a brief block of I'm screwing this part up. I'm doing it multiple times. Now I need to isolate that just to truly understand what's causing the problem and why, and then fixing that. Now we put it back into practice.
I've actually been trying to do that in ACE lately. And I got the idea from Rob Epifania. He was talking about it.
Mhm.
Like I'll run a stage in ACE, and if there's something that, like you said, it feels wrong, or I'm getting wrong results, you know,
Right.
I'll do that little piece of it a bunch of times and then do the whole thing again. And I had another thought on this, and this kind of applies. I don't think it applies just to me. It applies to a lot of people, but I know where it came from with me. So when I started this whole training journey, right, I started in, classical Japanese martial arts, which are very, they place a very high emphasis on the way your form is, having technique that looks a certain way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's an issue of confusing the medium with the message. That was meant to be to get people to understand what makes the technique work, but all too often that has become, my roundhouse kick, my Mawashi Geri must look exactly like this, right? And I grew out of that in martial arts a long time ago, but I think that's been an issue with me in shooting, is because I have tried to do the same thing I did early on as a martial artist with the shooting. My draw has to look like this. My reloads have to look like this. My movement has to look like this.
Yep.
When really it doesn't matter what it looks like as long as it works.
You're exactly right. The biggest takeaway I took from Eric as a coach, I don't recall one time that Eric harped on either myself or any of the other 7 or 8 students that were in the class about how either they were gripping the gun, how they were entering or exiting positions with their footwork or with their, there was never a time that it was like, it needs to look this way, or you need to do this, or it just became like, is it working for you at the level that you're applying it to? And if it continues to be a struggle, no matter how we're kind of throwing ourselves at this one little particular problem, then and only then would he be like, hey, you know what? And it wouldn't even be like, if you get a little lower, or you get a little higher, or you get on this foot or on that. It was never that. It was like, hey, how about we just focus on having the gun just a little earlier to this target? Or, hey, instead of aiming at this target, why don't you aim at this target to allow yourself to settle so that you're not so quick to shoot a mic or a no shoot on this target? And it just like taking that, like that little bit of approach, it was crazy to see how not only just confident the shooter was, but how much smoother their entry into things were, because you're taking the mindset of like, I have to come in on this foot, or my technique has to look this way. And it just becomes something way more passive, but more fluid, if that makes sense.
It becomes alive.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite things that Bruce Lee said was that your technique has to be alive, not dead. It's got to be fluid and adaptable, not rigid and confined and constrained. Right. And it's funny because like you look at Eric's technique and he looks very smooth and everything looks very similar every time. And it looks very technically correct. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I think like so many other things and I don't necessarily mean you, but like in general, people that train confuse the medium with the message. They're like, it's this good because it looks this way. And that's not really it. It looks that way because it's that good.
Right. Yep. And it watching him shoot throughout the weekend too, like if he ever did a demo, like, and he did a few demos, but demos of like a particular stage run or something, even though as strict or as smooth or as consistent as it was, his body just naturally did whatever his body needed to do. So like the thought of like, oh, I never want to have a cross step when I come into this position, or I never want to drop step out of this, or I never want to leave on this foot versus that foot. Like he lets the sights and the shot that he is taking then basically guide whatever his body needs to do to hold the sights to the acceptable, to the acceptable level on each of those targets. And if that means that sometimes he's pausing and kind of shooting on one foot as he gets ready to back out of a position, and then the next rep, it might be both feet are planted on the ground, but that's where the sights need to be, where the pause is at. You might look at like these little bitty things and be like, oh, but it's not 100% consistent because he's like, his approach is a little bit different each rep. But what made it consistent was the targets, like the targets and his read on the targets. Like if the sights aren't there, he's not taking the shot. And if that means then, where his foot might've been floating and now his foot, both feet are on the ground before he takes that next shot, that's what it is. Like the greatest thing he said, and I've said it for years too, but never as eloquently as he did, is I tell people all the time, like, do all the non-shooting stuff, like movement, reloads, running, all of those things as fast as you possibly can to allow yourself the time to make the best decisions behind the gun. And like, what are the good decisions? And I always ask students that, the good decisions are aiming, trigger management, sight management, right? The actual shot process. Eric, the way he says it, he was just like, I mean, he prefaced the question with what is the one luxury that we have in shooting? And so everybody's like, I don't know how to answer this. People were like, oh, this. And he's like, no. And he's like, oh, what about this? He's like, no. And what about this? Close, but no. And he let everybody answer that. He was like, the one luxury that we have in shooting is that we can shoot as slowly as needed to shoot the most accurate shot we need to, or we want to. Like, that's the one luxury that we have. We afford that luxury by doing all of the other stuff fast. So like running or moving or reloading or drawing, all those things are to help us afford the luxury to shoot at the speed at which we need to guarantee the hits. And I was like, okay, yeah, I get that. And it makes total sense. Like, do I need to rush a 30 split on a 25-yard target? I don't need to. In fact, I have the luxury to not do that as long as I'm doing all of the non-shooting stuff as fast as I can to afford myself that luxury. Now, the only time I would need to shoot a 30 split on that target is if I've got, I don't know, busted knees or a bad hip, or my mobility suffers to where I'm now no longer afforded the luxury to shoot as carefully as I want to. So now I'm going to have to shoot a little faster. But the shooting a little faster comes at the cost. What does that cost? That cost is a point. And if I'm effectively costing myself the points also equal time. So the points that I'm not shooting are costing me time on the stage, just like a lack of movement costs me time on the stage.
That's a really cool kind of paradigm shift, I think, because I think, and I'm certainly guilty of this, I'm sure to a far greater extent than you. I tend to think of it as I need to shoot as fast as I can while still getting my points, instead of thinking I need to shoot as slow as I need to get my points.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And
yep.
And that's probably something I'm prone to just because of personality type too. You know what I mean? Like always trying to push, but I don't think it's really stood me in very good stead a lot of times. Like it should be kind of looked at, and it's ideally it would be the same pace for either way of looking at it because they mean the same thing.
Exactly right.
But the way you phrase these things in your mind makes a difference about how you do them.
Yep. The psychological approach was completely different. Like, I no longer worry about, like, if the sights are there on a 15-yard target and I'm just shooting what I see. So as long as, like, foundationally, I am, I am consistent with the gun. If the gun lifts and immediately returns and I can fire the second shot on the 15-yard target, let's say in 0.25 split versus a 0.35 split, yes, it's a savings of a tenth, but I'm not looking at it from a time savings. I'm looking at it from was I capable of doing what I needed to do to ensure the alphas? The time is I don't want to say meaningless, but it is meaningless in a way. So I kind of did this little experiment with a kind of a private group of folks that I was teaching out at your old stomping grounds out at McHenry at
Yeah.
Alpha a weekend before last. And on Monday of that weekend, after that weekend, we did a kind of a private training, and all we did the entire day with myself and 4 other students was just explore the math side of things, like as Eric taught it to me. And so these are some kind of heavy hitter shooters that maybe aren't the most consistent either. And so the great thing is be able to take away the expectations of speed and just focus on the points, like just shoot the math. I don't care about your speed, just shoot the math. But I'd let them at first, like, I want you to shoot it as fast as you possibly can. Like, just, throw caution to the wind and shoot it. And then I want you just to shoot it based on your adherence to the math. And we do the hit factor homework on it, the predictions, figure out how many Charlies that we were acceptable on it, and then just shoot the math. And on a 25, we don't have 25 yards at that range, but what I did is I took a 15-yard target and I took no shoots and I covered all but 2.5 inches of the center portion of the A zone of it. So basically a no shoot tuxedo. And I put it far in the far left-hand corner on the west range. And so you're shooting that from a distance of 15 yards and you approached that particular target amongst a rest of an array, like 4 different ways as we just continued to build on the complexity of the stage. The pass or fail on the entire stage, like from the hit factor standpoint, was if you did not manage your trigger the same way as you were trying to manage the sights to that target ended up being the risk reward. If you shot that carefully and guaranteed the sights were lifting off the center of that to shoot 2 alpha, it truly didn't matter how fast or how slow you shot the rest of the stage. The entire stage would be an absolute disaster just because of a mic or clipping 2 no shoots on that target. And everybody felt like they're like, oh my God, I'm slowing down so much on that target. Every fiber of your being, I want to shoot that target faster, but you just couldn't. But everybody that felt like psychologically, like, oh my God, it's taking me forever. Bang, bang on that target. It felt like that. But as we were recording, even just video, they'd come into that position, pow, 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 pow. I'm like, it wasn't like what we play it in our mind is like, it's taking 3 seconds to shoot that one target. And you're shooting that target from multiple different locations in this, like, I think ultimately we got up to like 48 round stage. But the pass fail was if you you clipped 1 no shoot on that target, your entire stage, I don't care how fast you shot it, your entire stage was a throwaway because it just did not support the hit factor. Like the hit factor was completely skewed because of the points you lost on that one. But if you took your time, right, as Eric would say, you took the luxury of shooting that target as controlled as you needed to guarantee the hits, what people found out, all the guys, including myself, was that you still shot the stage just as fast as you did when you were physically or mentally out of control, visually out of control, and shooting it to the absolute, nth degree of your physical limits. But holding yourself accountable to the hits, the time was already, the time was still there. People just, they developed this thought that aiming cost me too much time.
Two things. One is, this is another one of making sure that you practice what you preach. I always tell my students that how fast or slow your shooting is solely dependent on what aiming technique you choose and what trigger manipulation technique you choose.
Yeah.
And that's what should drive it.
Level. Exactly.
Yep. That's one. But then the other thought is, like, lately, because you really got me thinking about this when you were talking about that. I've been shooting a lot more IDPA lately. And, I don't really want a down 1 on an 18-round stage.
You can't afford.
I don't want to shoot slow, but I don't even really want a down 1. You know what I mean? So I've really been focusing on, what Les would say is, stacking alphas, right? Just trying to really, and it's been
paying off pretty well for me in like the local IDPA matches. I still need to build some consistency with that way of shooting.
Mm-hmm.
I slip into my other ways still occasionally, right? But it's getting better and better. And kind of my ultimate goal now is I want to shoot at a good pace for USPSA standards and still have that level of accuracy. And that's kind of what I'd really like to have right now is like that. And I think the only way I'm going to get it is learning, like you said, learning to take and shifting that paradigm, right? Like not don't take any more time than I need to guarantee down zero, but instead take the exact amount of time necessary for a down zero.
Yep.
That's good stuff, man.
Like I said, I mean, it's little things that like I've heard and little things that I've taught. Like it was great to take that class and get the validation of like, haha, I am preaching that right. But at the same time, like I'm not applying it to that level, even in my own shooting. And therein lies the inconsistencies. So it's been great to see for me. Like, fortunately, I'm now on the road basically full time. So again, like my teaching season has really kicked off, but just in the 3 weeks or 4 weeks since Eric's class, I had shot 2 local matches. And then I had shot a match along with a class that I taught in Okeechobee, Florida a few weeks ago. And then this past weekend, I was in Savannah, Georgia, and we did a 2-day class around a 7-stage kind of local match. 7 stages. I mean, a lot of, some state level, like level 2 matches aren't more than, 7 or 8 stages. So the match in Okeechobee in Florida was kind of the same way. It was like my goal at those matches, not just because I'm shooting with my students, but my goal at those matches were to basically apply the math, shoot the math. Don't shoot based on emotion. Don't shoot trying to swing for the fences on anything. Don't shoot to win, shoot the math. And so my application of the math, I was 7 of 8 stages at the match in Okeechobee that I was able to adhere to the math. And I think I finished 4th or 5th overall out of like 80 people or something. And I'm shooting classic division, right? So single stack 10 round against, all the guys shooting open and carry optics.
BCCs and yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, the math is working. This past weekend in Savannah, again, my only goal was adhere to the math and shoot as consistent to that math as I possibly can for all 7 stages. And this was the first match I was able to apply the math, like to shoot the math so consistent that I was consistent for all 7 stages. I shot within the acceptable mathematics, according to Eric. And I finished 2nd overall, 1.4% or something behind the high overall winner, who was shooting obviously a high cap gun. Well, if I would have tried to chase the high cap guy with my low cap and dismissed the points to try to just chase the speed, I guarantee I would have not had the level of the heightened level of result that I had versus just shoot the damn math. And then like, if there's a time difference, the time difference is going to be based on the division that I'm shooting, not because of not because of some sort of performance issue that I've created. It's the most consistent I've ever shot.
This reminds me of something Les used to always tell me that, and this is one of those things like, training for anything, right? This applies to martial arts too. I can remember being told something and then years later going, oh, wait a minute. Why didn't I pay more attention to that? Right.
Yep.
And Les used to always tell me that you have to be at the pace. And he didn't really define the pace. The pace was like this nebulous of, this shooting with a sense of urgency and moving really fast, but shooting carefully kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to shoot at the pace, but then after that, it's all about the points. Like you can't be off the pace because you won't win if you're off the pace. You can't just, roll through it and shoot like the tortoise chasing the hare.
Right.
Right. But as long as you're on the pace, it is all about points.
100%.
And like, I'm not by any means at the level you're at nationally, but like when I watch the national top guys, yourself included,
it's always interesting to me. Like at local matches, you see all the times, like all the time you see this at local matches. People that are really good shooters do well and kind of outrun penalties and mics, right? That happens at locals.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen at nationals.
No.
Like and what really struck me was a conversation I saw on like one of those Shooting USA segments from nationals last year. And it was JJ and somebody else. And they were talking about how many points down they were for the whole match. Like, how many Charlies basically for the whole match. And that was the metric they were talking about because they knew they were all on basically the same pace.
Yep.
And I remember thinking about that the other day when I saw it, and it reminded me of what Les told me years ago. And now this is all I'm getting reminded of it all again, talking to you. Like you've got to have a certain level of speed. You've got to have that. But once you have that, it's all about accuracy and not making mistakes.
Absolutely. And the speed is also there's a forgiveness on that as well. If you've got, let's say, two shooters competing against each other, and granted it goes far beyond two shooters, but let's say you've got two shooters of equal strengths, and one shooter might be a little faster on his feet, the other guy might be a little bit more accurate. But if the shooter that's trying to win the stage based on speed alone, maybe is probably giving time back to his competitor, who doesn't necessarily then need to shoot at this blinding rate of speed, because for every point that the fast shooter isn't shooting, that's time in the pocket of the guy that he's competing against, right? And a lot of times we don't look at it that way. Like we're like, oh, I shot really, really fast. I was raw time champ, but I shot 9 Charlies and 3 Deltas. But if the hit factor doesn't support losing that amount of points, right? You're not playing the math right. You're trying to play raw time champ, but let's say if it's a 5 hit factor stage, every Charlie that you shoot is worth 0.4 of a second. So 8 Charlies times 4, that the guy that was a raw time champ just now gave his opponent 3.2 seconds just in Charlies alone to try to beat him. Then the Deltas, because the Deltas are worth double the amount of the Charlies, if there's 3 Deltas on there as well, so 8 Charlies and 3 Deltas on a 5 hit factor stage, now you're talking about another 8 tenths, 8 tenths, and 8 tenths. There's another 2.4. So 2.4 and 3.2. Now we're talking about, what is that, 5.6 seconds? So does the guy that he's competing against have to shoot that stage in the same raw time as the raw time champ? Hell no, because the raw time champ now is just given a 5.6 second buffer for the other guy to just outscore him.
Yeah, to just basically, I don't want to say not cruise through the stage, still shoot with a sense of urgency, but shoot under control and with discipline.
Exactly. And so the game that you're now playing, as Eric, so eloquently put this to us, the game you're playing is now, it's a point strategy. Like you're playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers, right?
I like that.
All time. And all I need to do is not lose the associated points, or the value of the points, or the time value of the points on the stage. And if I shoot to that mathematics, you're playing a math game that somebody else is trying to play a speed game, they're going to lose, because that's where the inconsistency comes from.
And I think like for me, because I've kind of been focusing on IDPA lately, I think this holds even more true than it does in USPSA, right? Because of the time down there. And it's really been interesting to me. Like the majority of my stages at my last 3 or so matches have been 0 down, right? I have picked up a procedural or two because, IDPA, but that's a different issue.
Sure.
And that's just me getting the rule set kind of truly ingrained. But I find that, it's not that I can't pick up time. I think I'm shooting a little bit too cautiously. I'm kind of over-confirming the sights a little bit. But that stands me in so much better stead than dropping a couple of points down every stage.
Right. Well, you got to think about it. In IDPA, there's still a hit factor in IDPA.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But the hit factor is extremely low, right? The hit factor in IDPA is a 1.
Yeah, and it's the same for every stage.
Lose, it's a second.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's like, how would you shoot a one hit factor stage in USPSA?
You cannot shoot a single point down because a one hit factor stage, 1 divided by 1 is 1. So that means you're getting 1 point per second. So you need so every hit is imperative to get.
Yeah. And I really, and I know I said it a minute ago, but like, that's kind of my current thing I'm chasing is I would love to get to the point where, and I mean, I have lots of injuries from my careers. I'm an older guy. Like I'm never going to be as fast as Christian Seiler, right? It's just not going to happen. You know what I mean? And I'm okay with that.
Sure.
But at my USPSA pace, my customary USPSA pace, I would like to shoot the same accuracy as I shoot at IDPA. And I think if I can do that, that'll be okay.
Oh, absolutely.
What's really been interesting to me that kind of, and I hadn't really codified this in my head until our conversation now, but what's really been helping me with kind of that math that you're talking about and not even trying to work on it consciously is shooting in the ACE VR.
Oh,
because it gives you the hit factor every time. And it's so easy. You don't have to do any math. It's so easy to go, well, gee, I was 0.6 faster, but I'm actually, 3/4 of a hit factor lower. Why did that happen? And it happened because of this Charlie, or it happened because of this.
Right. The only thing that kind of hurts a little bit in Ace VR is because of the differential between, say, shooters that are shooting it from the holster and shooters that are shooting it from the low ready. Shooters that shoot it from the low ready, you're automatically adding at least 1 to 1.5 to every hit factor. And so the stages have a tendency to be extremely high hit factor stages. So you can get away with a Charlie or two because it's all going to be based on the raw time almost completely, because you're shooting 12 to 20 or even sometimes beyond 12 to 20 hit factor stages.
Dude, I got a 25 hit factor. I got a 25 hit factor on a build roll from the low ready the other day.
Right.
I can't do that in real life. I am not Isaac Lockwood. I can't do that in real life.
Right. But if you had a stage that allowed you to shoot, let's say it was a 12 round or 14 round stage that forced 3 or 4 positions, like more IPSC inspired, to truly bring the hit factor down to that 5 to 6 level, I guarantee you it would change the way people approach that particular stage, even in Ace, because the Charlie cost you a significant amount of time versus just trying to raw time it out over and over and over again, like we can sometimes fall into the habit of doing now in Ace.
And for me, I was thinking more comparison with myself from stage to stage.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? For like seeing the math.
Sure.
And I've been trying to be really religious, and I'm not saying I don't shoot from the low ready. Like usually what I do is I give myself Monday. Monday is my day to go crazy because they reset the leaderboards. So Monday is my day to just, because I think there is value in doing some of that.
Sure.
But then after Monday, I try to be really disciplined about it. Like I try to, shoot it like it's real, not just not swinging for the fences every time.
Right. No, I do something very similar as well too. So,
dude, some of your hit factors in that thing, I'm like, how in the world did you do that? I was just happy I got a 25 on the build roll the other day.
It's reaction to the beat is where it's at. And some people look at it as like, oh, you're gaming, you're trying to jump the timer, things like that. Well, you physically can't, dare I say, jump the timer. Now, can you start initiating a little bit of movement as you're expecting the timer to beep? Yeah. But as far as jumping the timer, it's like you can't get the gun up to a target and start pressing the trigger before the timer happens, or it just immediately stops.
Yeah.
It stops the system. But like my goal, even in USPSA for real, is to jump the timer as early as I possibly can. We teach it in classes to students, like, hey man, you need to be earlier to the timer. Like on a draw, how do we expedite a draw and turn a 1.2, 1.3 second draw down to a sub 1 second draw? Well, if they're drawing after the beep, the P in beep and then drawing the gun, they're 3 to 4 tenths of a second behind the curve already. So to turn a 1.2 or 1.3 second draw down to a 0.90 draw, it's just like I got to initiate hand movement to the gun on the absolute leading edge of the beep. And I always tell people, like, if I can hear them pressing the button before the beep actually starts, like, that's what I'm listening for. I'm that intent on trying to get that early on the beep, because it automatically saves you time. But then people in the game, like what you see then on the Discord channel and things like that, they're like, well, that guy set that high hit factor based on jumping the beep. But that's the whole point, is to be as early to the beep as you possibly can. I mean, if I could be 0.01 reaction to the beep to the first shot fired, that's ultimately what I'm looking to do.
Oh, and that's definitely something I try to do in there too, is I'm not trying to cheat it, but I'm trying to learn to go the moment it's okay to go, like the soonest possible. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. You do have some freaky reaction time though. Like
I tried.
I was talking with one of the guys from Ace about, because people have been complaining about people jumping the beep, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they were going back and forth, and one of the guys asked me in a side message, about possible solutions to it, and I was like, it's really easy. Just measure Tim Herron's reaction, and if it's faster than that, they jump the beep. No, I'm serious. I'm dead serious. I told him to find out your reaction, like how quickly you react to the beep, and that's the bottom cutoff right there. Any faster than that, they're jumping the beep.
Gotta be. But I mean, I think about that all the time, though. I mean, that's what starts a good rep for me. Like, if I'm early, if I'm as early as I possibly can on the beep, guess what? I don't have to rush then. I don't have to rush the shooting. I don't have to rush absolutely, like, incredibly stupid non-sight pictures trying to, like, hurry everything else through it. It's like, if I get a good reaction time off the beep, and let's say it's a 0.20 to the first shot off the beep, then everything else can theoretically be a 0.17 to 0.20 split in transition across the rest of it. And I can just about guarantee, without ever even seeing the end results, that that's going to be a top of the leaderboard score run, just because I got a good run. Like, I got a good start off the beep and I was able to see everything. I don't feel rushed. When you start hearing the beep and you're like, crap, I gotta get the gun out, you tend to over rush everything else. So now you're rushing the shooting, and this is what causes excessive Charlies and Deltas or misses, or you're late on movers and activators. Like, so of course I want to try to jump the beep. That's the whole point. Like, in the sport as well.
So, like, in the real world, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. This is something, like, it's kind of a prescription I gave myself to avoid a mistake that I'm prone to, right? Like, you've seen my draws when I'm really pushing. I have a pretty fast draw.
Mm-hmm.
In the context of a match, when I try to draw at that speed, I tend to rush everything else because I've mentally set myself into pushing that pace. So for a while now in matches, I've intentionally tried to not do my fastest draw. And I don't know, like, maybe it's time to set that aside. Maybe I've done enough of that. But the reason why I did that was to avoid the other mistakes I would make, because I would come out blazing on the draw and then everything would be blazing in a rush.
And see, for me, my approach is a little bit different. So I know I've got a naturally fast draw, and I don't scoop draw either. But if I can draw to let's say a 3 to 5 yard target in, say, 0.75 to 0.80 to the first shot, I know that's going to carry more weight in the speed side of things for me than trying to shoot fast splits, because I don't possess the 0.15, 0.12, 0.11 splits that guys like, say, Isaac Lockwood or Billy Barton or those guys do. So where am I going to carve some time off to ultimately give me kind of the same end result to those guys? Well, those guys have got wicked fast, like 0.50, 0.60 draw, but in matches, I don't see those guys actually knocking down those super fast, like, scoop draws to those time frames. Generally, their scoop draws a 0.90 to 1 second flat. but then they'll match that speed with like blazingly fast split times. Well, if I'm saving, or if they're saving, let's say 0.02 to 0.03 faster splits and like faster splits than me. But if they're splitting the gun at say 0.15s and 0.14s, and I'm at 0.17s, but I can match the transitions at 0.17s to 0.20s, I still stand to finish within, let's say, 1/10 or 2/10 of a second overall by just being a little faster on the draw, like being more confident on that. So I know I don't have the speed to carry me in the trigger splits. So let me make sure that I'm earlier to the first target than they are. And then they'll chomp away at that, whatever I gained in the big chunk at the draw, they'll chomp away at that at the end, and we'll be pretty even. But if I'm 1 second draw with 17 to 20 splits, and they're a 1 second draw with 15 splits and 18 transitions, hell yeah, I'm going to be, by the end of it, I'll be 2-3 tenths behind them. So I kind of look at it from the other side of things. Like if I can get a fast draw on that first target, I don't have to worry about like pressing the trigger or not seeing the sights and transitioning the gun faster than I can perceive information, because I've already got a 0.3 of a second head start.
Lead. Yeah, you got to lead on them from the start.
Right.
And maybe it's time for me to try to start working that piece of it again. But it was, I knew I was giving myself a mental issue doing it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what I've been prone to for years, is that pushing and trying too hard.
The tension builds up. So now I've got a really fast draw, but then it turns into splits and transitions faster than I can visually perceive information.
Yes.
I get it.
Yeah. So, but maybe it's time to move past that too. I'm going to play around with it and see what I think.
Yeah.
See how it goes.
Yeah.
When is World Shoot?
World Shoot's September, end of September. So I will leave for South Africa, I believe, on the 18th of September, and I'll be there till the 29th.
Doing any safaris or anything?
No, unfortunately, wife's going with me. And she's taking basically her entire amount of PTO off. So she's like, listen, we ain't got much time for anything else. Like, we're going to go 2 to 3 days prior to you actually being prepared to shoot, so we can get through gun checks and equipment checks and all, take a day or two to kind of get the jet lag out of the system. And then we're going to shoot. And then after the awards, the next day, pack up and go home. So
how many stages is it?
I believe 30 or maybe more, but it's over 5 days. So it's like 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on. So, or it might be 1 day on, 1 day off, 3 days on, whatever the case may be. But yeah, it's 30 stages, or maybe a little more than 30 stages.
And it's that mix of short, medium, and long, right? So.
Oh yeah, it's all lipstick. So short courses in IPSC can be, I mean, that's the life or death. You know, like if you're not consistent on a 60 point, or 70 point, like short course, that's a 5 hit factor, and you're inconsistent anywhere, I mean, you stand to lose more points than you gain on, say, a 32 round field course.
I honestly really like
USPSA.
I really like the short and medium courses too. I think there's a different feel than there is like a 32 round course, and it's not an easier feel. It's just different.
Well, a 32 round course, again, you can absorb a mistake just with potential for more points. Whereas on a 60 round stage, right, you got 12 hits on the targets. You got 6 targets out there, or maybe 5 targets and 2 steel. Like, your performance has to be, like, your consistency of performance has to be on point, because a little slip up or a little mistake in one place, there's not enough points to absorb the mistake. The mistake is going to be glaring for you to see, as well as everybody else to capitalize on.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the IPSC. I mean, not that I've ever shot it, but I like watching it, watching videos of it, watching those guys shoot. I think it's, I don't necessarily agree with all the differences in the rule set, but I think it's a cool rule set in the way that it's different from USPSA.
Yeah.
I don't think either one is truly ideal, but they both have things that are really cool about them.
I agree. like I think it kind of takes some of the like gaming start positions out of it when everybody has to start. If the start position calls for facing directly down range, hands at sides, your hands have to be relaxed at sides, and you're not allowed to even look the direction that you want to go. Like it, so it neutralizes all of the, well, do I get in a position where I'm leaning really hard over here, or any of that? No, it just becomes like, no, like this is the start position. All of the super lengthy make readies all disappear. You don't have guys that are like trying to dry fire or air gun, the entire stage 3 or 4 times during their 2-minute make ready. And you're not allowed to see, to take sight pictures. You're not allowed to like rack the gun or dry fire the gun. It's like on the make ready, you grab a magazine, you grab the gun, you load it, you rack it, you put it back in the holster, and you're ready to go. So it's you can get through 10 or 12 stages in a single day in like 5 or 6 hours, because like everything is organized enough to it runs really, really efficiently. So,
And it's all like staff reset for their majors too, right?
For those it is, yeah. For most US IPSC matches though, we still got to go down range and paste up targets and things too, that's fine.
Yeah.
We're used to that as USPSA shooters, but I like the ideal of not getting to walk or game stages ahead of time. So like stages are completely roped off. You can look from the back of the bay and find angles and things like that, but you are not allowed to even step foot in the fault lines until you've been read the written stage briefing, and you've been given your permission. Okay, you now have 3 minutes to walk the stage, or you now have 4 minutes to walk the stage. So like that level of etiquette is pretty neat. Stages tend to be not as complex because of those things, but man, things run really, really efficiently that way.
And there's like some really technical shooting, seems like too. Like they may not be complex in the sense of complex stage plans, but it seems like there's some pretty aggressive movement and some pretty tight shots.
Oh yeah. Like I said, a 12 round, like what we would consider in USPSA, 12 rounds you might shoot that off from like one box with a mandatory reload. Whereas in IPSC, it might be 12 rounds and it might have you running 20, 30 yards from, like throughout the entire course. You run over to this position to shoot 1 or 2 targets, and then you run over this position to shoot 1 target, and run over to this position. Which is, I like that, not because it's like the athletic part of it. I like it because it does a better job of balancing the importance of shorter courses to the importance of medium courses to the importance of bigger, longer field courses. Like everything matters. Whereas in USPSA, everything's like, everybody's unhappy if a 10 round or if a 10 stage match isn't 300 rounds, and it's like, does it have to be?
I've never really understood that, to be honest. And maybe it's because I came to USPSA so late from like tactical style shooting. Maybe that's why, but like, I don't like hose fest matches. Like the matches they're all like 40 round stages. I just don't like that.
I don't either. I don't find it interesting.
I also don't like it when every stage has the same flavor.
I agree.
I like a variety of challenges.
Yep. And I think a good match, or a well organized and well directed match, will have those things. Different.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like the best matches. Well, I sent you a message about this. My buddy told me to tell you that he liked your stage.
Oh, thanks.
Remember, he got a first place at a pretty tough local match on a stage you wrote. So awesome. He's a good shooter. He's an up and comer. He's going to be really good.
Awesome.
But like I think that the best stages for me, like just as a shooter, right, are the ones that different skill levels are going to shoot them different ways.
Yep, I agree.
Like if you're this good, you'll shoot it this way. If you're really good, you'll shoot it this way. And if you're not that good at all, you'll shoot it this way. Because it gives you that kind of that thought process about what is the best way to do it.
Agreed. And I like stages too that have a multitude of different ways to shoot them. And there's not just one known clear cut, this is the way to shoot it, and this is the only way to shoot it to get the best, to get the best time or the best score. You know, if you start like, I like stages that are designed to like you might start in a centralized location, but you've got the option to shoot, you know, to move left first, then right first, then forward first, or whatever. And ultimately, all the positions still have to be hit, but it's not like we'll go to the right first and everybody's going to go to the right and shoot it the same way. And I find those stages kind of not as interesting either. So I like stages that have got options where you might see 7 different high-level shooters shoot it 7 different ways, and like they're all within, you know, the same hit factor of each other, which is super cool.
Yeah, no, and it's just which way they shot it was based on which way felt better for them.
Correct.
You know?
Yep.
Like the difference in going left to right or right to left on a target array, you know, it's what feels better to you, right? Or like on El Pres, when some people go back to the first target they shot after the reload, and some people start at the other target, the last target they shot after the reload. And it doesn't really matter. It's just what feels better for you. And that's kind of cool too. I like that too.
Yep.
Well, my friend, we have gone considerably over an hour again.
No worries.
No. It's always a pleasure having you on. I'd love to do it again if we can.
Yeah.
You know, it's always a good conversation.
Absolutely.
And I always leave these with you feeling like there was so much more we needed to talk about. I'll be thinking about things for days like, oh man, I should have said this, or I should have asked about this, or we should have talked about this. But real quick, before we wrap up, let everybody know how to get a class with you, where to find you, all that good stuff, so we can get some people in your classes so they can shoot better.
Yeah. So obviously the best way to find me is like through my website, which is timherronshooting.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Tim Herron Shooting, YouTube at Tim Herron Shooting, or Facebook at Tim Herron Shooting. But yeah, I've got, you know, I try to be an open resource for just, you know, everything shooting related. So I've got 100+ videos on my YouTube channel. I'm always posting stuff on Instagram, whether it be shorts or reels or lives and things like that as well. But yeah, my entire schedule for 2025 is schedule wise is filled. And it's on my website. So if you're interested in a class, I'm just about certain, just about everywhere in the country, there's probably something in your area or within a 4 to 5 hour driving distance to you someplace. So yeah, if you would seek me out, if you've got any questions or anything, you can send me a DM on Instagram or a private message through Facebook, or send me an email at tim@timherronshooting.com, and I'll be glad to answer whatever I can, and hope to, you know, see everybody in a class soon.
Well, and like I said at the beginning, everybody who's listening to this, Tim has been a big influence on my shooting, and I can't recommend his classes highly enough. So if you're not a competitive guy, don't let that bother you. Shooting is shooting. Come seek him out, and he'll help you out a lot.
Indeed.
Hope everybody enjoyed the episode, and I will talk to everybody next time. See you all soon.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Way is in Training. Please come back again as we explore how training makes us better at our craft and better in our everyday lives. See all of you soon.